Hey everyone, today I'm going to do a video on my final review presentation I had for my third year first semester architecture studio. So I'm going to go through, this project is named Skeletal Void, um, and overall my presentation was very successful in my opinion, that I executed, and I'm very proud of it. I usually, not a very good presenter, but I planned everything out and scripted it, so this one was a very good one. Along with the work. The work spoke for itself, but it was more than just the work. It was me presenting it in a way, a narrative that I wanted to, and was the most effective in my opinion. So let's get on to it. Uh, so, so the site is in. This is a site analysis, and the site is in Seattle, Washington. A little bit of background is the program is the a logging pavilion, ferry terminal. Sorry about that. Logging pavilion, ferry terminal, parking deck, and a queuing line. As you can see from this picture, there is some queuing happening here. And it was optional for us to address the homeless issue that was happening in Seattle, but I chose not to tackle that issue in my project. So here are just a few pictures of the site. Some of it is just a site, and then some of it is just the overall kind of environment and feeling and texture, I would say, of Seattle. Again, these are some pictures of Seattle, and surprisingly, all of these pictures are extremely sunny. Usually, Seattle is a very cloudy place. I think this image in particular really describes what Seattle most of the time looks like. There is a little bit of blue here, but yeah, usually it's pretty cloudy. So we go into the bit of the site analysis. So we have this site analysis that happens here. This is a sun path study. This is just my vegetation study of my site. The land, water versus water boundary. The program, the main programmatic features that I found were important to my scheme. The pedestrian circulation, the vehicular circulation, the exits and entrances. These were these thresholds that were defined within the site. Kind of this like funneling effect that these thresholds have versus in the circulation within the site. These bodies of water. Sorry, I keep clearing my throat. I just have I don't know. I just finished eating something, so. So yeah, this is the bodies of water. So Parti study. So my parties consisted of finding points of interest within the site and actually mapping them. So these points of sight consisted of edges or corners of the site, very specific locations. So as you can see, these three corners create these three masses. So all these points of interest or points of the site are later then converted into a Parti massing. So as you can see, these massings are created and actually start to form a geometry on the site relative to the site, and actually based off of site context. So as you can see, there is a water boundary in this area, so the curve is kind of there to mitigate, like kind of how the push of the water is, the force of the water is pushed against the site, versus how the pedestrians are on this side, so kind of the curvature of the site versus the curvature of the site and how the pedestrians would enter the space. So I thought after that, why don't I hybridize these two parties in a way that don't have because with these parties, it's a constraint by just using points of the site. By just using the main only points of the site, why don't I use two parties and hybridize them to find actually a relationship within the party and a relationship within the party, and actually find some kind of resulting factor that the party creates because of the two kind of relationship it has together. So these are the hybridization of the parties right here. These are all my iterations of the hybridization of the parties. So yeah, these are really nicely done in my opinion. So it really spelled out how I was speaking. So these are the iterations of Parti with just one single piece. So as you can see, it's just within the relationship of the site. And these pieces are with the hybridization. And I ended up choosing Parti iteration 5 because of the spatial condition it created within the space between these two pieces. So here's another picture of the iteration in a little bit bigger scale. So we go on to this void condition. Now before I go on to this, as you can see, these two parties create a condition of space that I was talking about within here, which is what I defined as the void condition. So here is the void condition. So a big inspiration of mine was Peter Walker. He was he was a big inspiration in a way that he always found a way in his landscape architecture to create people, or to create a landscape that would attract people to circulate around the landscape, which is what kind of the goal is. So he does that very well. One thing I noticed, one key component he does, especially let's say in the 9/11 memorial and the University of Texas at Dallas campus, he uses a body, in this one he uses a body of water, and actually this body of water acts as a main focal point on which people would circulate around. So I thought this would be perfect for my void condition, and a way for this void to act as a celebrated space that people can circulate around. So as in this sense, the 9/11 Memorial Museum, acts as this circulation of space for where people would walk around. But I ran into a problem with my Parti. So if we go back and look at the Parti, this is the original shape of the Parti, but the problem was, I ran into a problem that how could I emphasize this void, but without treating the parties as these kind of secondary effect, without treating it as something that is just there and focus way too much on that void condition that was created as a result of the party, because I still wanted the party to be somewhat still relevant within the design scheme. So we go to this. This is my attempt at trying to create a way of organizing a way to bring back the party and bring back the party and also emphasize the void further. So this right here, if you're wondering where these outlines are coming from, it's actually the outline of the void. So right here is the outline of the void, and these kind of shell taxonomies is what I call them, is a methodology of creating a systematic way of making these conditions that would wrap around the entire site and emphasize the void and bring the parties as kind of one entity because of what the void is, the strength of the void. So we can look at this. I have many iterations of them, and I end up choosing a variation of the skeletal gridding, and it will happen to be this one. What this one has different from this one is this one's from end to end. As you can see, it spans from here and kind of goes all the way across, versus the central void, where it actually kind of stops halfway. And this actually happens to stop right where the void condition starts. So I thought this is a perfect way of creating that void condition, or emphasizing the void condition, and using the parties as a way to manipulate the or a party as a way to, or using the skeletal condition to manipulate that skeletal condition of using the void. So these were a way of actually trying to bring the parties together and emphasize that void further. So we go into the outline of the void. So this is the outline of the void I have. It's a very simple diagram, nothing special here, but it really spells it out. This simple void diagram. So when we go back to Peter Walker and how he actually uses that water condition to actually have people circulate around it, we look around and we're like, okay, how can I add that body of water and kind of make it circulate? So I thought of immediately, the first thing I thought of was offsetting this original this void condition and actually having it offset here. So this is where the water would go here. And I also found the kind of spine of this void. I was finding where the spine of this void would be. And this spine of the void would later be important in how I would create this lily pad effect this lily pad effect as an icing that would actually act as a datum or a kind of a further final articulation of the void. So the way I did that was doing these type of studies called the pond articulation. Later on, I thought about it as lily pads. It wasn't my first thought, lily pads, ironically, even though these are very similar to what they would act as. So we have these iterations by shape, and the two sets of iterations have them inverse. So the spine of the void would be the strongest, would be where the biggest parts of the lily pad would be, versus the spine of the void would be where the smallest points of the lily pad would be. So I did a bunch of iterations of those, and I ended up doing this one. Although in hindsight, I realized I really should have done this one, as it really spells out that spine further, unlike this one is a little bit drowned out, and not enough. Not in my opinion, the variation isn't. It doesn't deviate enough. So with all those ideas combined, I came up with this. So this is the original, or this is the finalized site plan. So as you can see, we have that void condition and this lily pad condition versus these skeletal gridding condition that is along the perimeter, and actually starts to emphasize that void without just merely using the edges of the Parti. And here's an axo of it as well. So here is an axo view with the shadow. And here's the ferry. Here are the floor plans for them. Floor plans for the parking deck that we had and the ferry terminal. Here's the transverse and longitudinal site sections. Here are some elevations. So these are just two elevations. Here is a perspective section of the ferry terminal. So as you can see, there's a lot of structure in this building, and this is the first exposure that we have had to structure. So I say it came out quite successfully, and we're going to actually go over a study of that. Building transverse section, and a building longitudinal section, and now we get into the structural study. So this was my first time, as I said before, diving into the structural study of the structural study. So it's really interesting, and I got really excited on doing this. So let's get into this. So first off the bat, I had no idea about anything in structures. So this was my kind of attempt on understanding structures. And luckily for me, I had a professor that was teaching structures, so it was really nice to have that access to asking questions about structure and using his knowledge in a way that I can start to iterate structure and actually use it as a design tool and not merely just a material catalog, in a sense. That I don't just use these mere cataloging techniques and actually just the plain boring structure versus just actually start to articulate the structure to work with my design and actually further the design kind of even further than it is right now. So right now, I just start out with a very basic detail view of the beam and actually start to figure out ways to kind of place this cylindrical column that I have into this flange. How would I insert this? So I thought of clipping or this kind of mask, or not mask, but kind of a plate that would hold it, another plate, except that would be on the outside. This one is an articulation more on the column. As you can see, it's indented here. This one is articulation of the column as well, but it's also kind of bloated, you see. And this one is more of the placement. What if I just let the flange just sit on top of it? If I had a cylindrical flange and I just let it sit on top of this placement holder right here. And I end up choosing this one that they do sit on it, but it's kind of cusp, kind of like your hand would be holding something. So it would be like almost like your hand is holding the beam. And now I have a diagrid bracing, or diagonal bracing. So I knew that when I had these two columns next to each other, and since that these were 8 feet apart, I needed a way to brace these together. So I was going through iterations, and after doing this, I realized it did have to be triangulated, but it was still a good investigative study that I could understand that what the capabilities were of bracing and kind of the detailing I can do with it. So this is a diagonal bracing. So these are some iterations of the diagonal bracing. These are diagonal bracings versus these directional bracing. So it has kind of these arrows, and the directionality of the bracing is pointing towards one way, and it's another directional bracing but inversed. This is a hybridization of that directional brace. So I thought if I just mishmashed them, what would they look like? And this is what I came up with. And this is the diamond shape bracing iteration. You can see it gets more intense and kind of crowded versus this one's medium and this one's pretty light. I ended up choosing the light one, but I had to iterate it further by putting a spine through all of these. Finally, I did a trusses study. So I was figuring out how to put trusses within my structure, and I had no idea how to do that. So I started to do, this is the normal one, so this is a normal kind of type of truss. So I knew what type of column and beam I was going to use. So I just put the same column and beam for everything, and then had my trusses iterated. So these are the thicker trusses versus this thin, very thin truss, very thin, very medium truss, I'd say. And then you have these two special trusses that this one is two that split along and actually kind of hold the beam versus how this one also holds the beam, but also kind of goes through the part of the truss right here, just barely, just kind of that slight articulation. Oh, sorry. I ended up choosing this one over this one. It just happened to read better and kind of more clean versus this one was kind of random how it just penetrated through the truss. And here is a wall section of my model. This is the wall section of the structure of my model. So the key moments were mostly the wall or floor to foundation to wall, wall to floor, and wall to roof condition. And this is more of an exploded axis. This is an exploded axo of my structure. So we start with the wall and the floor. We have the trusses and then the top of the truss right here, or top of the flange. Then we have those cylindrical columns, the bracing, the purlins, the metal decking, and then the concrete topping. So this was especially useful because I read my structure as layers, so it was nice to explode it all to see the individual parts. And even while creating this axo, it actually helped to understand what was really what was the kind of key components of each structural part. Like, because technically I could have separated these parts out, but I felt they read better as one. So even in creating this, I did learn something. So a lot actually. Here are just some renderings. This is the same section perspective. This is inside the ferry terminal. This is also inside the ferry terminal. Seeing that structure. This is a ferry terminal as well. Ferry terminal, seeing that bracing. Seeing more of that bracing and that column condition. And understanding the metal decking and kind of understanding structure and seeing how it's all put together. This is another ferry terminal view. Another ferry terminal. So you can see more of the structure. And this is more of that kind of corner condition of the ferry terminal, seeing how everything's put together. Now we have that pond articulation, as you can see right here. Versus you can actually see people are starting to circulate the space and actually populate it. It's not just a blank space anymore. It's actually has some life to it with the people. Have some more people in there. As you can see, people are now populating the ferry terminal. Now this is an overview shot of the people within the within the logging pavilion. More people you can see, and then you can see a little bit of people within the second floor of the ferry terminal. Another view of people in the ferry terminal. And this is more looking towards the logging pavilion at the very end and seeing all these people kind of surround the area. Another view of the people. This is more of a human scale view, just understanding the scale of everything. And this is another one, except their feet sink. I don't know why it did this. And this is also the ferry terminal, but I kept this one because the reflection, it actually was kind of realistic in a sense that you could reflect back what was there. That's if it was pure sunny, which never happens yet. So yeah, guys, this is my project that I was doing. This is my finalized project in Seattle, Washington ferry terminal. I'm really happy on how it turned out. My presentation went out pretty well, and I hope I could explain the project pretty thoroughly in this one as well as I did in the other presentation. Although I only had 5 to 8 minutes to speak, and I think I spoke for about almost 8 minutes on this because I had a walkthrough game as well of my ferry terminal. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'm gonna be coming out with more grasshopper content. But this is what I've been working on. So, hey guys, thank you guys for watching.